Welcome to the Missouri Musicians Then and Now podcast. I'm here with neo-spiritual method artist Raz Wickham.
It's good to be here.
This is really cool. We're on video.
I believe your first video interview for this podcast series.
I'm so excited. I'm nervous. I'm excited. I'm happy. A range of emotions.
That's a good thing to have in a setting like this.
Absolutely. Well, I've got a lot to talk to you about. We haven't seen each other in over 10 years, right?
Yeah, probably since 2006 at least.
Man, getting older, aren't we?
And it's like what George Carlin once said, we're not getting old, we're just getting older.
Yeah, I'm a fan, definitely. Well, let's rewind, because I knew of you because Jake, your brother, him and I go back a long ways. And
speaking of which, when did you two start playing together? I don't remember that time period exactly. Because I knew you knew each other before you started playing, but...
He actually had to remind me.
Oh, did he?
Because he said, yeah, you brought your guitar to the community center when we were playing basketball. And he's like, you showed me, check out this song that I learned and stuff. And I'm like, what? I don't remember that at all, but that's one of the fun parts about this. You know, we all fill in the blanks with these past stories and stuff.
Because certain people remember certain things.
Absolutely. Well, I knew of you, and I knew that you were a musician. Still are, obviously. And so I want to find out, when did you start playing guitar? How did you get started with all this?
Well, I got started due to my older brother John, who was a musician, and he played in a cover band, and they would cover tunes from bands such as Megadeth, Metallica, Pantera. And back when I got my driver's license, I used to drive Jake to our older brother's shows, as many as we could go to. And just being able to see people play that live for the first time and seeing the raw power of what heavy metal really is, it's inspiring. Watching people play it and produce that kind of power from, such an instrument. Right. So my older brother, he gave me, I think, what was his first guitar, and I tried to practice on it, but it wasn't very comfortable, and, it was a very cheaply made guitar, so it didn't have very good sound. And finally, I just said, can you teach me a Megadeth song? And the first song he ever showed me was Symphony of Destruction from the Countdown to Extinction album. And fairly simple song, but, has some chord progression that would be a little complicated for first-timers like I was back then. And, then Jake started picking up on guitar soon after that as well, and he'd found an itch for it. And originally, I had just thought of myself as being a hobbyist. Mm-hmm. Where I would just learn to play songs from bands like that I highly enjoy. But I never thought I would be good enough to do what I do now. But then the more I did it, I started getting a knack for it myself. And once I started writing lyrics and stuff to one of my first tracks, I just thought, okay, this isn't that difficult. And what truly inspired me to start my own band, embarrassingly enough, I was at the very first R.A.W. concert.
All right.
The very first tour she had back in 2003, May 9th. And there was a couple of bands that opened for her named Gob and Simple Plan.
Uh-huh.
I don't even know if those two bands are still around, but when I was watching these two bands on stage, I realized they're about the same age as me. I can do that. Why can't I do the same thing that they're doing?
Mm-hmm.
So from then on, I was on this mission of, I'm going to start my own band and just see what I can do with it. So that was kind of the genesis of how I got started, becoming a musician, essentially.
So I wouldn't name those bands as influences for you necessarily.
No, they were. Well, I wasn't there to see them. At the time, I was a fan of Avril's voice, mm-hmm. because I had grown up with, a lot of the classical artists, but this was the first time I had known of an artist that was around my age group, because she's a year younger than me. So I thought that was a neat thing back then. And that's why I thought I want to go see this concert. And, I can't speak for anything of what kind of artist she is after her second album. But, you know, with that first album, I thought, okay, she's got a good voice and she can perform. And I thought, you know, if someone even like her, who was a year younger than me, can do this, why can't I?
Right.
So I was kind of artistically or creatively challenged to take on, you know, creating my own band and becoming a musician.
So what were your influences back then?
Well, as a kid, the very first album per se that was the big influence on me was called The Traveling Wilburys,
Mm-hmm.
which was an album, you know, based off the supergroup with, you know, Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne, and George Harrison.
Impressive.
And,
Off the top of his head, folks.
well, I have to credit my father for that because he's a drag racer, and whenever we would travel to go to certain locations for him to drag race, he had the original cassette tape that came out in 1988, and we would just play that all the time.
That's cool.
And I just love that album from beginning to end. And then from there, you know, I grew up with movie soundtracks. So I grew up studying the film composers such as James Horner, John Williams, Hans Zimmer, Jerry Goldsmith, Alan Silvestri. You know, they've done a lot of big blockbuster films. But it wasn't truly until 1996 that I could say that I was officially introduced to the world of metal. I had, you know, I grew up with some video games that had some metal type soundtracks, and I loved certain movies that had some metal songs in there, but I hadn't truly been exposed to it until 96. And that's because, once again, of my older brother John. He introduced me to Inner Sandman from Metallica, which has a lot of people's first song into metal. So then he showed me a VHS tape called A Year and a Half in the Life of Metallica.
Mm-hmm.
Except I believe it was version 2, where it was just based on all the stage stuff, where they were doing the tour for the Black Album. But then within the same month, then he pops in a cassette tape. Or no, wait, it was a cassette tape for the album from 1990, Rust in Peace. And that first song, Holy Wars. That is what really changed everything for me, because I was drawn to the intelligent lyrics, the intelligent songwriting, the furious guitar riffs, the soloing, the vocals, just everything. And so I was just a full-blown, you know, young metalhead by that point. And then my first concert ended up being Pantera back in 2000 for the Reinventing the Steel tour, and Jake went with me to that.
Oh, man. You boys were raised right.
Yeah, a little late bloomers, because most musicians, even the legendary ones, a lot of them start around 12, 14
Mm-hmm.
years old. I didn't start until I was about 18.
Wow.
But I wasn't taking it seriously until a year after high school.
Okay.
That's because some things in life I go into thinking, okay, I'm not good enough to do that, so I'll just do it this way. But then when I start catching on and learning, that's when I realize, okay, now it's a challenge for me, it's fun, I'm going to see what I can really do with this. And that's in any profession I take on too.
So like a lot of artists, it kind of goes back to something, it goes back to something with like the Black Album. A lot of people got their influence from that. Did you start there and then work backwards, like with older Metallica? And was that Megadeth CD before or after the Black Album?
It was a year before.
It was before, okay.
Because Rust in Peace, I believe, was 1990, then the Black Album was 1991, and then Countdown to Extinction was 1992.
That was kind of how I got started too. Like my oldest brother would be in the basement working out, and he'd have the Black Album on.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, man, what is that? And I was like 6 years old. And as I got older, I discovered what it was. And then I went backwards and I found, you know, the true, just unbelievable metal works before that.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people were influenced by that. But I know Megadeth is probably your number one. Is that right?
Yeah, and I like other bands too. I mean, I've always loved Judas Priest as well.
Okay.
I'd almost say they're my second favorite metal band, and
still going.
Yeah, still going, and so is Megadeth. They just pumped out their 16th album last month, and it's It's great. It's great from beginning to end. And I won't go too much about my fandom for that particular band, but I will say that, yeah, as far as metal bands go, they've always been my favorite just because, you know, I highly respect bands where it's more of a collaborative effort, but even collaborative efforts can be stomped by a true visionary,
That's
which is,
true.
you know, Mustaine has that.
I agree.
And when I was kind of developing my band throughout the years, or in the early years, even back in 2003, when this was back before I think even MySpace had hit. And so in order to get attention, I would have to go around to music stores, you know, stores that sold instruments as well as CDs, and just post flyers
Mm-hmm.
and describe on there, you know, what I was looking for as far as musicians. And at the time, I wouldn't put the band name because at first I didn't have a band name. Originally, I wanted to call the band Evanescence. It was a word that I had seen years prior to
Really?
the actual band that came out. And I didn't learn of Evanescence until right after I had learned of Avril Lavigne, which I didn't learn of her until almost a year after her first album came out in June of 2002.
Okay.
Because I was working at a music store called Music Outlet, which used to be a branch of Music Biz. And our store was closing down, so we didn't get that album by the time it came out. So I was kind of late coming into that. But then by the time I found out that, okay, there's a band already called Evanescence, I thought I need to come up with a different
Oops.
name. So I think I spent a few months trying to decide what it was going to be called. And then I thought I might as well just use the name I've had since 1997, The Edge of Beyond.
So is that where it started when it comes to forming a band?
Yeah, pretty much.
All right. Tell me more.
What would you like to know more?
Well, The Edge of Beyond has been going since then, right?
Technically, the last time The Edge of Beyond was ever on stage as a full band was June of 2008, and that was in
Okay.
Nashville. But I've still continued on with, you know, my solo projects or, you know, music singles, as it were, and, you know, have 3 books published under that IP, which I originally started in 1997 because originally I wanted to be a filmmaker.
Right.
Or I guess if you even rewind even farther from that, I wanted to be a cartoonist. I wanted to work for Disney because I was highly influenced by like Mickey Mouse, because after I was born we moved to Frankfurt, Germany, so I didn't have a whole lot of things to be exposed to. I had like Smurfs, Looney Tunes, and Disney cartoons. That was it. I didn't have anything else. Like I didn't know what Transformers was. I didn't know what Star Wars was yet.
Wow.
So I was influenced by Walt Disney because I don't know what kind of cable programming we had over there, you know, near a military base, but my parents would record these bits on TV where Walt Disney would present himself in that library of his, and then they would show a cartoon. And then, you know, by the time Who Framed Roger Rabbit came out in, I believe, 1988, by then I really wanted to be a cartoonist because I thought that's incredible how, you know, 2D animation can come to life in a 3D space the way that they pulled it off in that film.
Right.
But
That was one of the first times that was done, right?
it was the first time that it was done of that caliber.
Yeah. Like a live action movie
Yeah,
with
because
animation.
ILM, the special effects house that George Lucas started, which stands for Industrial Light and Magic, they're the ones who helped create the 3-dimensionality of the characters, because they had the cartoonists draw the characters over the actual 35 millimeter film frames
wow.
of the film, but then ILM had to go behind them and use their computer technology to give them like a 3-dimensional shading and certain lighting. That way they look like they're actually illuminated by whatever settings they were in front of camera with the live action stars. So drawing was originally my biggest passion growing up, and then I found guitar.
So we got music, and you said you were influenced by like movie soundtracks, like composers, I guess you could say.
Well, and also, you know, people in the film industry such as George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, James Cameron. I mean, the list goes on.
So it sounds like all of these mediums of entertainment are kind of forming like into one and influencing you like all together at the same time.
They eventually did, because even before I became a musician in 1997, October 24th, it was the day that I decided that I want to start my own franchise. Because I was introduced to IPs like Star Wars late. My uncle one of my uncles who has since passed, in December of 96, he had showed me A New Hope on VHS. I think Jake watched it with me too. We were at a family gathering, and I'd always heard of Star Wars, but I'd never seen it yet. And I was just blown away by it. So then on actual Christmas Day of 1996, it was either TNN or TNT, one of those cable programs. They had a Star Wars marathon, like just all Christmas Day. So I watched the whole original trilogy back to back. And then fast forward to, that in 97 they had re-released those films in theaters, and I finally got to see them on the big screen. And then fast forward to October of 1997, that's when I had finally come up with a synopsis of what I wanted for my own story to be a franchise and the name, The Edge of Beyond.
Wow. So, you being exposed to that stuff late, you were kind of taking everything in all at once, because a lot of people with their musical influences or their history or their origin story, it's like, oh, I went to a concert and I liked what I saw. Like, there's a lot more to it than that in this instance, which we'll kind of get into later. But so The Edge of Beyond, it's more than just music. You mentioned books, right?
Yes, TEOB is the nickname for it, TEOB.
Right.
So I'll just refer to that for the rest of the interview.
I'll try.
Yeah, it's TEOB for now, folks. That was originally meant to be kind of the next big Star Wars type franchise, because at the time I was creating it, I didn't realize that George Lucas had been developing a prequel trilogy to Star Wars. Well, then even after the prequel trilogy hit, to my knowledge, there was no plans to extend those films. And so I kind of did the music thing as a plan B. I'm not normally the type of person that has a plan B. I go all out. For me, it's kind of all or nothing with most things that I approach creatively. But I did the music thing kind of as a plan B, because my ultimate goal was to still get into Hollywood as a filmmaker, with TEOB as my big, beloved, if you want to call it that, project.
So you maybe thought that since Star Wars is seemingly coming to an end, to your knowledge at that time, maybe you had a something that could fill the void?
Yeah, because at the time, there was no next big thing yet. Because, we'd been getting some Marvel films like the X-Men trilogy and the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man films, but there wasn't that next big Star Wars type thing yet.
Right.
These days we've had more so of that stuff with the MCU and the DCU. And then, of course, they brought the Jurassic franchise back, which I'm glad they did. I like what they've done with it, but, at the time, it wasn't just about rehashing familiar IPs just yet. So that's why I thought, okay, if I just keep pursuing this, maybe I'll have a shot to push this the way Lucas did with Star Wars. Maybe someone in the industry will take a chance on me.
So the books, it's a trilogy, right?
Technically there are 15 chapters, but I only have one trilogy published as of now.
Okay. So where can people find that?
They can find them anywhere, such as Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, pretty much most, if not all, of the online book retailers.
All right.
And the only reason I was even able to publish the books because I moved to Nashville for a 5-year period, which maybe I'll get into that later because it kind of relates to one of the topics in relation to ST.
Sure. What about the screenplays?
The screenplays I've been developing since the early 2000s, because, back in the late 90s, we had floppy disk style computers and dial-up internet, and I would try to do what I could to type, but back then I mostly just wrote stuff in notebook form. It wasn't until in the early 2000s I was taking more of the screenwriting seriously, because that's when I was researching, okay, how you actually do this. And at the time I thought, I'll just write my story in screenplay form. Well, the problem with that is screenplays are what are used in Hollywood to be greenlit. into either TV show, film series, what have you. But the public doesn't see that unless it gets published in like a book form. Like on some films, like the Dark Knight trilogy, I actually have this. They have a whole book that has all 3 original screenplays in it that you can read. But they don't do that for every film property. And if you're developing a screenplay, the layout of it and the way that it's meant to be read is for people in the industry. So it's meant to flow very quickly, which is why a lot of times they say that 1 page can count as just 1 minute of screen time or more, depending. And that's why it wasn't until 2014 I'd realized I need to do something different with this, because if I just keep T-Up in screenplay form, the world's never going to know about it if no one picks me up or wants to greenlight the series. So that's when I decided to reverse engineer and publish them as books.
Okay.
Which I went through a couple of ghostwriters that didn't work out, because at the time I didn't know anything about, writing in book form. It's a completely different beast than screenplay form. For some it's easier, for some it's harder. And I only had 4 months, this was the summer of 2015, to get the first book ready, because I'd gone through 2 ghostwriters. And by ghostwriters, what I mean is I needed someone, or I thought I needed someone to help adapt what I had written in screenplay form into book form, because that just wasn't my expertise. Well, since they didn't work out, I think I spent close to 7 days contemplating, strategizing, okay, what am I going to do to get T-Up out to the public? Because I thought I could never do it. And then I just said, screw it, I'm just going to take on the challenge. And I only had 4 months to do it, and I did it. The book was published October 24th of 2015. And that was the first of the first trilogy.
I'm no author, but 4 months seems like a very short time to write.
It was very short and very intense. I had to do that on top of working full-time, Monday through Friday type job. But regardless, what I published at the time wasn't perfect. Even the artwork at the time wasn't perfect, but I still reached the finish line.
That's very admirable. Congrats for that. I'd imagine a lot of people out there are dying to get published.
Well, these days anyone can get published, because they have what's called that self-publishing, and I had simply done it through Amazon.
Oh, okay.
Because they used to have what was called CreateSpace. I don't recall what it's called now, because I haven't logged in quite some time, but used to. That's why, had I had that kind of opportunity back in the early 2000s, TI would have been more of a focus than doing the band thing. But at the time it wasn't, because the only time you could get your book into a physical form was if you found a local printer that could print everything, or you got picked up by a publisher. Well, one's very expensive, the other is chance of luck.
Right.
And just knowing the right people at the right time.
Well, no matter what happened with T.I. musically, just the screenplays and books, it's unbelievable, that you pulled that off.
Well, I had to keep it going.
Right.
Because
whatever it took.
It's easy for those of us artists to get depressed in life, especially when things aren't going right. But for me, the best way to fight such a thing psychologically is keep yourself busy. Right. Always have something to aim towards as far as creative goals. And even if by the time you accomplish said goal, you don't get out of it what you want as far as recognition, the important thing is you still finished it. You reached that finish line.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, for me, that's kind of the most important thing as an overall artist, is just reaching the finish line with each project so I can move on to the next one. That's
really important. Like, I'm one of those people that I don't like leaving things unfinished.
Yeah.
I'm the same way, and getting that validation from reaching the finish line, it feels good.
It was definitely a great feeling when that first book came out, regardless. Like, the artwork on the cover wasn't near what it should have been, but I had very limited time and was working with people that had just come onto the team to do stuff. But at the same time, because since drawing was my main passion back in elementary and high school, there were times where I wouldn't finish certain art projects. And we're talking, an art class, and believe it or not, I didn't do very well in art class. And it wasn't because I wasn't a good artist, because one year I think it was my junior year, I won Best of Show with an art piece that I had at one of the local competitions they had one of the shopping malls. My problem was I would get these big ideas and then not have a way to execute it properly the way that I wanted it to. So then I would just quit it. So it wasn't until I started getting into being a musician and then getting the screenplay stuff done that I was finally able to prove to myself that I can reach deadlines. I can get stuff finished regardless of how big my ideas are. And granted, it's easier when you've got help, especially in the visual department, which, I've had for years now, but, it took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get to that point where I could get the right people within my extremely small circle to produce what you see online currently.
Right. Was T.O.B. the only musical band experience you've had?
No, I've been in a few others, including my younger brother Jake's band, Senseless Tragedy. I don't remember exactly what year he started it. I remember we played 2 shows together with our own separate bands. T.O.B. had played with ST the first time at a battle of the bands at a community center. I don't remember who all was in his band as far as members at the time. And then we played again, I think in 2006. We played at some venue called Donna's Ice House in Osage Beach, Missouri, which, most locals of Missouri know that place. But I used to go to every show that I could that he played, in similar fashion to our older brother, John. And every chance I could get, I would go see him play, and I would kind of help with their gear, loading on stage, loading back into the vehicle. And then the opportunity came in January of 2007. He had just sent me a text and he just said, "You're up." And I knew exactly what that meant. And so I had a week to learn the songs before the first show with them.
A week?
A week.
So for those of you who haven't been following along, let's connect the dots here. Jake started Senseless Tragedy, and Andy Wickham, who was also on the podcast, he was in Senseless Tragedy. Then after Andy, I was in Senseless Tragedy. And then after me, you were in Senseless Tragedy.
And that's how I met you.
Right. Until they disbanded. But so you spent a good while with them, and you had a lot of musical experience under the belt with T.O.B. already. Mm-hmm. And so what happened after that? Like what other musical experience did you have?
Well, the span that I was in ST for was 6 months. Lasted from January 2007 to June of 2007. After that, my band broke up the same month too. Now, a guitarist of mine had stayed with me, but we couldn't keep any other members. And there's one of the biggest lessons I've ever learned, and it kind of stands for any profession. It could be music, it could be movies, business related stuff. The more talented your group is, the harder it is to kind of keep the reins on them. And the reason I say that is because I'll get back more to the ST stuff, but just to make a note of that, whenever I had my band and my brother had his band ST, when I would practice with them, there was that hunger to practice, to nail down those songs for performance reasons. The lineups that I went through just in Missouri alone, it was hard to rein them in to focus on caring about the songs. Because, in their minds, it's, well, we're already so good, why should we have to practice all the time? They didn't get that. So that's kind of a warning to the audience here that, you can have the most talented people in your group, whatever the profession is, but more egos flourish when that happens. So you have to find yourself fortunate enough to get a team of people that have that professional talent but are humble, down to earth, are willing to work as a team and not just focus on what they're getting out of it. But after ST, later that October, I moved to Nashville, Tennessee to attend audio engineering school and kind of continue my band there. And I did. A guitarist that I'm still really good friends with named Jerry Cleary, who's from the mid-Missouri area. He ended up moving with me winter of 2008 to help me kind of solidify a band there. And I'd already secured a new drummer named Zach Dubois at the time, and then we secured a bassist named Keith McQuarrie. And so we just started playing shows, and we befriended one of the local power metal bands called Oblivion Myth. And I became really good friends with them. And unfortunately, my band broke up the last time, June of 2008. Our last show was at a famous venue called the Exit Inn in downtown Nashville. So after that, I just kind of helped Oblivion Myth as a roadie, kind of the same thing I used to do with ST. But then the time came where their original singer had left.
You're up.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't asked to. They were struggling looking for a singer in the winter of 2009. And I had been kind of singing to the songs. And by this point, I kind of knew the songs already because I'd been to every show I could go to help them out. So I went to an audition because I was living with one of their guitarists at the time, and I just told him, I want to try out. It's like, oh, you think you got what it takes to replace Andy Freeman, who was their original singer? I said, I don't know, but I'll give it a shot. And the vote was unanimous.
Sweet.
They approved of how I sang the opening song that they had every night when they would play a show. And I didn't end up being in their band at that time. I don't remember why that didn't happen. But then fast forward to May and June of 2010. They had gone through a second singer by that point, and they needed someone to play a string of shows. So by that point, I decided, okay, well, then I had to learn the whole set list. I practiced with them for at least a whole month, and we were supposed to do 2 shows June of 2010. We only got to do 1 because one in Nashville was canceled. But we did a show, I think it was in Ohio, and it was called the Warriors of Metal Fest. And we also had to learn a Ronnie James Dio song because he had died that month.
Oh.
So me and I guess you could say the leader of Oblivion Myth, we both chose Evil Eyes. And so that was the only show I got to perform with them. But that was one of the most awkward experiences I ever had because I'm not the kind of front man that likes singing without a guitar strapped to me.
Oh, you weren't playing guitar?
No, I was just singing.
Ooh, yeah.
And that's different for a person that, that takes a different kind of mindset to do that. Just like it takes a different kind of mindset to strap on a guitar of this caliber and, sing and play very technical songs.
Right.
So, and, I nailed the performance side of it, didn't miss a note, didn't miss a lyric or anything, but I can only hope that my stage presence was okay at the time. I used to have a DVD of it, but that's been lost for years, so I'm sure there's footage out there somewhere of that particular performance, but I have ST to thank for why I learned the stage performance that I had even for my own band when I was in Nashville.
There's so much to say about learning through experience.
Yeah.
And you're never too old to learn. And, it takes...
You're never too old to learn as long as you're willing to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you don't let your pride get in the way.
No, you can't.
Or your ego, because you'll never learn anything if you're too worried about that stuff.
And that's why when it comes to past members that I've played with or worked with, more specifically, I'll just say from a musician standpoint, because when you're on stage, none of the petty crap matters. All that matters is what you're producing through your fingers or through your vocals.
Right. Yeah. I can definitely thank ST for growing my guitar skills because I learned a lot when I was with them in that short time. And I was once quoted as thinking that I was a legend in my own mind, but then I learned these songs that were a lot harder than I was used to playing and writing, and it was a really rewarding experience to experience that growth.
Mm-hmm.
Don't forget to check out our website at www.momusicianspodcast.com, where you can find news, blog posts, videos, and full-length episodes. Now let's get back to the conversation. So tell me about Omnivis. I have Omnivis on my notes.
Yes, Omnivis was a very short stint. I had met a bassist named Damian Cronin, And at the time, I had befriended the singer of his band, and he was a comic artist. And I had approached him to do the comic art for T-Op, because I didn't have an artist beforehand that had that kind of skill set to help me get it out. And I thought, well, okay, well, I've got the story. This needs to come out visually. And I think it was through the winter of 2011, Damien had helped me to redesign the T-Op logos. Because the original T-Op logos I had hand-drawn in 2003, and then I had a female artist at the time scan that stuff into Photoshop, and she did what she could with it. You know, looking at it now, those logos were very rustic, but Damien had helped me with his Photoshop skills make a more streamlined, professional set of logos that were based on my more perfected drawing, because, you know, by that point I knew how to make sure that things were symmetrical and whatnot. And so as a favor to him, they were in need of a second guitarist, so I said, okay, well, I'll help you out. We only got to play one show, which was October of 2011, but it was one of the most fun shows I've ever done, because again, I wasn't the front person.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of felt like I was in ST all over again. So I just got to be to the side and just got to rock out. And they were more of an industrial metal band, kind of like, you know, Power Man 5000 and Static X type.
So something I gather from this is a lot of musicians, you're not going to survive if you're a one-trick pony. Like, if you only can play guitar, you know, you're going to have a short shelf life. You need to be able to play guitar and draw on your other influences, like with, drawing.
Yeah.
And, you know, singing, filmmaking, marketing, promoting. You have to do more than one thing to really be successful, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, and that's a lot of what changed my life back when I was becoming a musician, or I guess if you want to call it a real musician, back in 2003, when I was taking it more seriously beyond a hobby, because social media was coming into play, MP3s had hit the scene. So it changed everything, where those of us that were considered voiceless finally had a way to speak up and have a voice. Now, granted, that's bitten us in the ass these days, because things are so oversaturated, and, you know, everyone's out there to make a name for themselves. You know, I respect anyone who wants to push what they think they have to offer. My only advice to them, just based on my own credentials, is make sure that what you're doing is the absolute best you can do before you put it out there. You know, don't just put it out there for the sake of saying, okay, look, I did a thing.
Right. Well, that's the thing. You know, a lot of people, and we were talking about this before we got started. It's just push record. Yeah. It's that kind of you know, encouragement that people are getting from somewhere, and I mean, I kind of see where that comes from, but at the same time, that's where the saturation comes from. It's because everyone's learning as they go, myself included, and like, you put out lots of crap in the beginning while you're learning, and then you just hone your craft over time. And I think if people would do what you said and just really give it everything you got before you put it out and put out a finished product, then the quality of everything will be better, and perhaps it would be easier to differentiate really talented people, because some people are naturally talented at certain things, and then some people can learn a talent. Yeah,
or have to work at it.
And I think what this big rant is about is just about those two types of people just being in the same space and trying to work with each other.
Yes, and when it comes to producing the best stuff that a person can do, it takes real discipline, and that's something that most artists I've worked with lack. They lack that certain level of discipline, because they're so gung-ho and trigger happy to have the spotlight on them,
right,
without questioning, is the time right for me to have the spotlight? Am I deserving of such a spotlight? You know, for instance, when you're a production artist, which, you know, I kind of am, there's a lot of working behind the scenes, behind closed doors, you know, for hours, for months, for years, in ways that other people don't see. Well, because of the way that social media is used these days, a lot of artists don't want to put in that kind of work.
Right.
It's all about me. Look at, I call it the look at me syndrome. They're not interested in spending 6 months behind closed doors trying to perfect their craft. They want to keep churning stuff out as quickly as they can, so that they're remaining, or keeping up with their popularity. And for someone like me, the popularity doesn't matter. What matters is what I'm producing. Is it what it should be?
The body of work.
Because if it's not, then I'm wasting my time and wasting other people's time.
That's a really good way to go about things. I think it's an old school way that people should adopt.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And it also goes into the same thing with people that, everyone has different influences, and rightfully so, because, we're all tuned differently. We all have different vibration, both spiritually and in terms of energy. But part of that discipline is, I've said this for years. I first said it back in 2004 with my first guitarist. I once told him, you need to know where your idols stand. For instance, if you're going to strive to be a very healthy person in this world, are you going to just live off of fast food? You can't be truly healthy if you're living off of that. So for instance, let's say something that you find entertaining is fast food, and then the fine dining is like something that's better, but it's also healthier. It's okay to like that fast food, but you can't have it all the time, because what does it do? It changes your biological structure. So point being, artists, as a word of advice, they need to pay attention to what they're digesting.
Right.
But creatively. Because if all you're doing is digesting stuff that, can be considered garbage or low level.
Creatively, that was good.
Right, exactly. If you're digesting some of that stuff, that it can produce a negative outcome. And you can see that with a lot of artists, even these days, based on what they're producing. You can almost, like, for instance, if you're looking at an artist's profile and they have their influences listed out, and then you hear what they have to offer and you realize, okay, well, that makes sense, because it's what they're doing isn't beyond what they're influenced by. So
Right.
that's why you have to be careful what it is that you're digesting creatively, just as much as you are spiritually and even just biologically with food.
Man, you hit it right on the head. I've experienced this personally since I started this podcast. I've found that when you use the word influence or influencer or influences, I think a lot of people apply that to kids, like, oh, they're a bad influence on these kids or whatever.
Like, for instance, back in our day, parents had a fit over Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
They wouldn't let us play it at first because of what they'd heard in the media, because it was the parents groups and the, I forget the name of the other group, that were responsible for the ESRB. And that was the first game to ever have that labeling on there because of how violent it was. But back to one of the points I was going to make is people should realize that, it's okay to be entertained by stuff that would be considered substandard. Even I like stuff that, wouldn't be considered grade A quality, but I know how to differentiate what it is compared to what would be grade A quality.
Absolutely. You talked about Mortal Kombat. The word influence is all over that story, because the parents may or may not have been influenced by the media, or the media influenced the parents, and then the parents influenced the people to get that reaction of the rating system. So talking about digesting stuff, personally, as an adult, I've figured that out, that adults are influenced by everything just as much or maybe more than kids. So if I'm going to spend my time on social media or on YouTube or something, I need to digest things that are going to make me better.
Yes, exactly.
Whether it's fixing a house or a car or writing a song or filming a video, like, if I'm digesting that kind of stuff, it really benefits me. And like you said, if you can differentiate that kind of stuff from stuff that's just, silly stuff to entertain you, I think people could really utilize social media in a positive way.
Yeah, and like I said, everyone's allowed to enjoy what they like, but there comes a fine line between, okay, what are you digesting on a full-time basis, especially
Right.
if you're trying to be a so-called influencer or a creative type in general. If you're going to push something out publicly, you better be cautious what it is that you're digesting, because what you're creating is going to be a reflection of what you're influenced by. And that's why, and this isn't to sound pretentious by any means, because again, even I like stuff that wouldn't be considered gray A quality, but again, it's a matter of knowing the difference between where something sets, on the hierarchy of quality versus, something that doesn't.
So, with that being said, how do you think the current state of the world affects music and media and Hollywood and politics and stuff like that? I think it's been infiltrated. Like, all these
Yes.
mediums of entertainment have been infiltrated. So tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, it's definitely been infiltrated because, let's face it, even the legendary artists that we all like, whether it's Elvis Presley, Michael Jackson, all great artists, but even back then, such artists only existed on a level of fame because they were allowed to. It wasn't all about their talent, it was because the powers that be allowed them to do what they did professionally. And the same thing is like that now, except, us artists, we have more control over what we can produce, because now we're not at the mercy of Hollywood to produce a song, release a book, release a short film, or even a full-length indie film. We can do just about whatever we want on certain things. And it's limited. We don't have the reach that Hollywood does, but in general, as you say, the industry and pool of talent was infiltrated many years ago because, for instance, I assume you've been to a comic convention at one point in your life.
No, I haven't.
Well, then maybe you're aware of all the different fan artists that exist.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And nothing against fan art, because we're all fans of something. Every great artist is a fan of something. We all take inspiration from something that came before us. But these days, it's all about that instant gratification of what can you do best to imitate someone else. It's not about originality anymore. And again, it's nothing against, because there are a lot of artists that do even just fan art. And I say fan art in relation to like what I dealt with in the convention circuit when I was pushing T.A.B. as a book series. But you have to ask yourself, yeah, okay, some of them may be making a living at it, but are they truly happy with it? Is it really purposeful? And that's the problem, that you used the term infiltrate. That's exactly what happened. Is the creative community was infiltrated, almost like having the little devil on your shoulder saying, hey, you don't need to do that original stuff. Give that up. Give in to the system of things the way that we control it. Just regurgitate everything that everyone already knows. We don't need this original stuff anymore. And why? Because it's harder to control something original versus something that's already been out there.
I can't disagree with that at all.
And that goes for music, comics, books, movies, everything.
You were talking about films earlier. Tell me about R.A.W. Productions.
R.A.W. Productions was started in October 24th, ironically, which was T.A.B.'s birthday, back in 2003. And that was meant to be my version of, say, Lucasfilm or Walt Disney Pictures. Granted, it's small, and I'm not, famously successful in that level by any means. But I needed a production entity to oversee the operations for T.A.B. and any other IP that I came up with under that. Kind of similar to, you look at Pixar, they have their own separate IPs that they release over the years, and it's the same with us, because the T.A.B. isn't the only IP that I've got. We have other IPs such as an epic steampunk adventure series called Gunmetal Row. We have a family series called Lost and Found. We have other sci-fi works such as Abernation, and we also have one called Prehistoria. And originally T.A.B. was the first thing, or kind of the only thing I wanted to do as far as developing a franchise. But then when I realized, hey, I got a knack for kind of directing and producing other projects too. So I just thought, let's just become an in-house production entity and just produce things that are of quality. And the whole reason for it being called Raw Productions, as the tagline dictates, producing a crystallized standard of quality through raw talent.
And those also happen to be your initials, right?
Yes.
Ha! I did my homework.
It's good that somebody did, because most people don't.
Hey everybody, it's Jordan. I just wanted to invite you to check us out on Facebook. Like, follow, drop me a message. Let me know if there's someone you'd like to come on the show. Tell me what your favorite podcast episode was. Give me some feedback, tips, tricks, positive stuff, negative stuff. If you have a question you'd like me to ask our guest, let me know on Facebook. I just want to hear from you, so let's talk. I hope to talk to you soon.
So what do you have going on currently? Because I view this almost like you're on a road in a vehicle, and your first stop is T-Yob, the band, and then you keep driving, and then you do some.
There's been a lot of driving.
Yeah, you do some screenwriting, and then you do some books, or vice versa. You're just kind of hitting all these things. So what's going on currently, and what's coming up?
Well, currently I'm preparing my 10th music single to be released publicly. I have 9 of them out so far, and the thing about them is they're not new songs. They're all older songs. I've just been re-releasing them in this fashion because back when I first started playing, or even back when MySpace was out, before Facebook had become a thing, we didn't have a way to get our songs out there.
Right.
Our songs or albums, but these days anyone can do it, just like anyone can self-publish a book. So instead of beating myself over trying to produce new songs, which I still do, I thought, wait a minute, why can't I go back and remix and remaster these old songs that had great performances? They just weren't mixed well at the time that they were done. And one of my oldest songs that's online right now is from 2005. And so that's been something I've been doing for the past 3 years consistently, is just trying to release a single whenever I can get it done, because I have to remix it, remaster it, and then I have to do a photo shoot for it. That way we can get the single cover prepared. On top of that, last year we shot a lengthy commercial, a narrative style commercial for the Field of Dreams movie site in Dyersville, Iowa.
Oh, right.
And the purpose behind that was because we at R.A.W Productions had donated 2 of the original theater posters to be put on display on site. One of them is now displayed in the basement area of the Red Barn next to the house, and the other one is right there in the living room of the original farmhouse from the film.
Cool.
And we also donated 2 high-quality LED light boxes from Glowbox LLC out of Kansas City, Missouri. And kind of to help celebrate the idea of the original double-sided theater poster being on site for the first time, I came up with the idea to one of the site managers, why don't we do a commercial to advertise this, so that people know, even if they're traveling cross country, that they're going to get to see this on display. Because most people have never seen an original poster that came from 1989. There may have been those of us that were old enough to have seen the original film back then, but these days, that's a very rare thing to see an original theater poster that was used, in a theater lobby or, outside a theater building. So they gave us, kind of full reign to do what we wanted. It was difficult to do because of all the visitors, because I was in costume playing a shoeless Joe Jackson. We'd have so many people stop us to do photos, which was fun, but with my particular level of methodology, it was very distracting. But we eventually got it done within the span of 2 weeks. So we're actually and finally releasing that November 1st of this year, and it's nearly 14 minutes long. But again, it's a narrative style commercial where it kind of plays out like a film scene that progresses from day to night, and then kind of the reveal of the poster. Other than that, back to my 10th song that I'm trying to get ready, we plan on releasing that this December, and it's called Maestrosity. Now this one is strictly an instrumental. It doesn't have any vocals in it, but it's another one that's now, it'll be 10 years old in December.
Wow.
So, and I do have new works as far as songs go, but I'm waiting until I kind of get through some of these older ones before I get the new ones out. And then on top of that, Raw Productions has been bestowed the, I guess, job to promote this air purification unit, which we call PuriPal. We came up with the branding for it June of last year, but at that time it was a battle between which entity they were going to go with as far as the investors. Well, they ended up going with a different one, so we just kind of dropped the project altogether and moved on to other things. Well, then July of this year, the opportunity came back for us to get back on board and do all the marketing under our own branding. So that's one of the things we're currently doing. Is the website's nearly ready to launch, and we can start pushing this as a friendly consumer product.
Man, that's really exciting, because there's so much going on. It's got to be challenging to do so many different things under like these umbrellas that you have with T.O.B. and Raw Productions. So it's really neat that you have all that going on. Would you say you kind of come full circle with T.O.B. and it's like it's kind of back to like a hobby again, or is there going to be a push in the future?
You mean as far as the band side of things?
Yeah.
Oh, that's one of the reasons why I started releasing the music singles, so that when the time comes, I can send it to the right people and see about getting me members of my choosing.
Cool.
And not from a local sense, because no offense to local scenes, but you've been there, you've lived it too. It's where I'm at now creatively. I can't work with local scene for what I do, because back even when T.O.B. was a band, I mean, we did some bigger venues here and there, but a lot of times we were lucky to play in bars.
Mm-hmm.
Even ST, all the other bands at that time, that's how we were treated. And sometimes we had to pay to even play in a venue.
Ugh.
They would expect you to sell enough tickets to even get certain time slots.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not doing that anymore.
Right.
Like, if I'm going to get T.O.B. back on stage, it's going to be done the way that it was originally envisioned to do back in 2003, and we're talking arenas, lights, pyro, all that stuff. I mean, everything I had planned for T.O.B. even predates what the Trans-Siberian Orchestra eventually became visually, because I wanted a small certain piece orchestra with a choir backing up the band and all that stuff, and that's because of my influence from film soundtracks.
Bingo.
I wanted to combine the two in a way that to this day I've still never truly heard. A lot of power metal bands tried to do it, but it gets to a point where, and this may be seen as a subjective opinion, but when it comes to the power metal genre, it seems like they try too hard to have that epic symphonic sound, and there's that fine line where, for me as a musician, like, you still got to have that old school rock and roll grit to it.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you lose that, it gets very monotonous after a while. When you're hearing these people sing super operatic with all this symphonic elements behind it, which I have symphonic elements behind my music, because that's kind of what my music's labeled as, is, symphonic metal. But I think there's a fine line between, going symphonic but pulling it back a little bit and just having that rock and roll grit to it. And that's where the Megadeth influence was big on me, because they could get epic with the complexity of their song structures, but they never went too far with it.
I agree. Yeah.
They still kept it gritty. Mine's a little beyond that as far as the epic scale and the symphonic nature of it, but I still scale it back to where it still has that old school American rock and roll heavy metal feel.
I'd agree with that. I was listening a few days ago on Spotify, and it was definitely intricate songs, and exactly what you just described, really. I mean, it had the symphonic elements to it, and it just wasn't over the top, because
Right,
a lot of
exactly.
people can pick up on that really, really quick, and I would assume most people would get turned off by like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, this guy's just going overboard with the orchestras and whatever. So it was right on the money in my opinion.
I'm sure some people would think I went overboard on some of my older songs. Like this past May, I released a song from 2005 called Final Bout. Well, it's 8.5 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because back then when I was writing, I was mostly influenced by, what Megadeth and Metallica were doing back in the late 80s and early 90s. And, they had some pretty long songs.
That's what you were digesting back then.
Exactly. I mean, you look at songs like Holy Wars from Megadeth or Master of Puppets from Metallica. They're both long songs. They're longer than 5.5 minutes. And at the time, I was still learning how to structure songs. I didn't know how to make anything too mainstream sounding. But that's the beautiful thing about having influences like that is those types of bands, they did the really long, complex songs, but they also did the short mainstream stuff.
Yep.
So eventually I caught on how to do that.
Yeah, it's an evolution and it's a process, and we all learn from it. There's nothing wrong with tweaking the formula.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with people having longer songs. Not everything has to be 3.5 minutes for radio play. And I actually prefer a song that, is like 4.5 minutes, even pushes the 5-minute time barrier. The same with a film. If I look at the running time of a film, especially if it's meant to be a big spectacle, I want that to be over 2 hours no matter what. Because I'm in it for the long haul when I'm going into something like that.
I don't want to go to the theater and see an 1.5 hour long movie.
Yeah. I kind of avoid those, but if they're, minimum 2 hours, okay. If they're below, I get concerned about the quality or what they took out footage-wise.
So earlier you said methodology. What is neo-spiritual method artist? What does that entail for us new people?
It was a title that I officially started going by, I believe, May of 2020. And a lot of it was based on my colleagues within my direct circle. Because, I'd studied method artists for many years. Like, even in the world of acting, you had actors such as Val Kilmer, even Christian Bale or Heath Ledger. Even Jim Carrey's been known to be a method actor. And that was the kind of intensity I was told that I had with my work, and it was kind of suggested, why don't you go by an official title, because you're not like other artists. You're kind of, you do books, you do music, you produce, and all this other stuff. And I thought, well, there's definitely a methodology to my work, or a madness to it, if you will.
Right.
But, everything I do as well has a spiritual basis, not to be confused with religious, but everything I do has to have that spiritual catharsis to it, so that it's something that the listener and or the viewer connects with on a spiritual level. Because we all have a spirituality about ourselves, and everyone's spiritual paths are different. They may come to a similar outcome, but sometimes they're different, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. But that was something I had learned through my discipline over the years, through what hardships I had dealt with, whether it was just life in general or dealing with other people. I learned how to kind of master that technique of pulling from what's known as the ethereal realm and automatically being able to write what I was feeling. The same with, name a scene from a film that you can get emotional watching.
Oh no. Putting me on the spot here. What about like Titanic when they're on the door in the water and stuff?
Well, just that movie in general. That's a very good example. I'll do one better though. Mufasa.
Oh.
I say that one because that was more of just a short scene.
All the listeners are like, don't talk about it.
Yeah, those of us that grew up in the 90s, it's like we don't talk about Mufasa's death.
No.
But I'll bring up that scene in particular. To this day, even those of us adults that grew up with that film can still tear up when watching that scene.
Yeah.
And some of the reasons why is, one, the nature of what happened to Mufasa. Two, the music. Hans Zimmer's score for that was so eerie, it gets to us here. Now, this is what a lot of people, especially artists or musicians, don't realize from a scientific level. Whenever you are feeling emotional, listening to a piece of music or watching a particular scene, where you're actually tapping into the energy makeup of the ethereal realm. That's what I learned to master, to pull from in order to do all of my writing, as far as like Tia when it comes to the screenplays or the books, as well as my musical writing. I know how to tap into that, which is why in my younger years I would say I was less sensitive psychologically of a person. These days, I know how to tap into that, where you have to be sensitive in order to invoke that level of emotion. Because if you are insensitive, then you're not going to invoke that kind of emotion out of your audience.
That makes sense. I agree. So Raz, we've covered a lot here. I got to get a few things in.
Get them in.
So you mentioned that, I think it was the Omnivis gig that you played, going back to that, was like the most fun you've had.
Well, it was one of the most fun. I wouldn't say it was the most fun.
So I want to know what your best gig, your favorite gig, and your worst gig was. So when I say the best, it's like the most fun you've had, the best you've felt afterwards. When I say the worst, I mean I want to know about some musical mishaps that you may have experienced as a musician.
Well, I'll start with the most embarrassing moment I ever had on stage. When my band broke up in June of 2008, it was just me and my guitarist, Jerry Cleary. And later, I think it was around September, we had befriended a band, as well as Jake did too, because he used to play shows with this band called Awoken Shadows.
Oh, I forgot all about them.
Yeah, they were kind of a hard rock punk band.
Wow.
And I'd always kind of looked upon them as like the Anthrax to my Megadeth. That's kind of how our relationship was in that way.
Okay.
Because, in relation to like Scott Ian and Dave Mustaine.
Right.
Well, they had a show that was coming up September of that year, and we were scheduled to do it, even though the band had broken up. So Jerry and I kind of discussed it, and I'm not one that likes to cancel things. I like to go all the way with everything that I do. So we said, why don't we just go up on stage, have our songs playing through the PA, and we'll just play guitar to it and we'll sing to it. Well, that was the most embarrassing moment I ever had on stage, because the sound was so bad that after the first song we just couldn't do it anymore. But what saved it is that Awoken Shadows were so hospitable. They got up on stage with us and we covered like a few Megadeth songs. They were trying to keep the show going because they felt so bad for us, and we were just doing it because at the time I just thought, I'm not going to cancel the show. I don't care how we play it. So while it was embarrassing, I had a good outcome from it and learned that through my embarrassment, another band tried to, save the outcome.
That's how it should be. Everybody should have each other's backs.
Yes.
So what about the best?
I have two best shows. One would have been with ST. The other one would have been with my band, The Edge of Beyond. Now for ST, I would say the best show was, you'll have to correct me because I do not remember the name of the venue, and it may have even changed names. It was in Columbia, Missouri.
The Blue Fugue?
No.
No?
Keep going.
That's the only one I know.
I don't remember if it was Mojo's or...
Mojo's.
Was there one that had Rose in the title?
Oh, I think so.
I don't remember what the name of the venue was, but it was after I had joined, and this was months after I had joined, so I'd become pretty seasoned with the guys of ST at that point as far as performing with them. And again, I can't remember what month that show was, and I don't remember the name of the venue, but as far as playing with ST, that was the best show I ever had because we played without a hitch, the intensity was there, that first song that we would kick into, I just went into that fully prepared mentally to just slay, and we did. And even members of the band from California, Ghost in the Machine, they were present because they were curious to see, okay, who's this new guy that's in ST now? I don't think they knew at the time who I was, but we just hit everything off without a hitch, and it was an intense show.
That's awesome.
For The Edge of Beyond, I would say the best show I ever had was probably... It was a show with Oblivion Myth. And it wasn't like the best outcome, but that's why we enjoyed it so much. We played at some venue called French Quarter Pocket, and there was hardly anybody there, but we ended up just kind of playing for each other. And everything was relaxed because we didn't have hardly a crowd, and instead of just canceling the show, both bands decided to still play. And we both just had fun. You know, we opened for them, they watched us, and then after we were done, we watched them, and it was a heck of a time. That, you know, it's amazing how much fun you can have playing on stage even without the audience intended.
Oh, I can totally relate to that. I've played to many empty bars in my day. I'm sad to say, but...
It happens.
You were talking about ST, so I got to ask you an important question.
Shoot.
Would you be open to some type of reuniting, one-off show, whatever reunite would entail, getting the band back together? Would you want to do something like that?
When and where?
When and where. There you go.
And I say that because, as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter what drama you have with other... It may be different in a band setting than, say, other professions, but for me professionally, when it comes to any members I've dealt with in the past, it doesn't matter what drama there was in the air at the time. When you're on stage, that drama doesn't matter. It should all be behind you, and that's why in a heartbeat, I would do that with ST, because that was actually the most fun I ever had in a band. It's where I learned how to move better on stage because I wasn't glued to a mic so much. And at the time, you know, it was humbling because I came into it without any form of ego, knowing that, hey, this is my brother's band. I'm not joining his band to tell him how to do it. I just did what he told me to do. I learned the songs. You know, I gave suggestions here and there, but, you know, I wasn't there to control things like I have to do for my own band because, you know, he was the leader, not me. And yes, I would do that in a heartbeat, especially if the venue was right. But the members would have, including my brother, I would prefer that we practice.
Of course.
To where the songs are tight, like they used to be.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it unless that same intensity and that drive was there.
I think I've gotten a similar response to that question, like that. And I tell everybody, like, there's obviously hurdles to overcome with reuniting, but I say that the first step is just getting people on board, and then you go from there. So,
well, you'd be surprised how many people will get on board with rejoining whatever it is, whether it's a band or working on a certain project, because they're all afraid to talk to each other.
Yeah.
But that's why it's good that, you know, you ask that kind of question to those of us that have been in a band like that, because, you know, one person doesn't know what the other one's thinking, especially if they haven't spoken to each other in years.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in my case, I don't look at it as, okay, I'm just completely written that person off. Now, there's people in my life that I don't have anything to do with these days, but that doesn't mean I wish them any harm will, or that I wouldn't do something project-wise with them again if the circumstances were right and the project was going to be executed to my standards. And by standards, I just mean professional. And when it comes to a possible ST reunion, yes, in a heartbeat, I would do that, because at that time, that was a band that was hungry for what they were doing. And you could see that with their performance.
Right.
I mean, I noticed that every time I went to their shows, and I couldn't apply that same level of performance to my band because, again, I had members that thought that they were too good for this or that. But in ST, it wasn't about that. It was just, hey, let's just put on a good show, let's have fun, and we did. We went wild with it. I mean, you went wild with it too when you were with them.
I shared a lot of the same experiences and growth that you did. So I totally echo everything that you said. So just to finish things out here, I want to know how somebody can branch out. Let's be specific and say musically. When it comes to networking, artwork, venues, like, because you have high standards and you really care about your art. I mean, maybe I just answered the question, but what advice do you have for other musicians or new musicians on how to navigate through this current scene and this current musical environment?
My best advice is do not worry about the popularity of others, because a lot of it is extremely fake. It's very, how do I put it? It's processed. I think of it as processed food.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of food items that are made these days that are overly processed, and it's the same with artists. There's a lot of overly processed artists out there that they're just a product. That is all they are. And if you're after for that fortune and fame, then by all means, you may get what you're looking for. But if you're after, like what I've been after, you know, I just have always wanted to do what I do best comfortably. I'm not after all this fortune and fame, because there's a lot of soul selling in that process. And not everyone has to do that to become successful. Even, I mean, there's even some film directors that I wouldn't consider had to sell their soul to be where they are right now. But when advising any new musicians or current musicians that are getting themselves so caught up in the popularity of others, because when you go to people's social media, it doesn't matter how many followers they have. They're just numbers. Those numbers don't mean anything compared to the quality of work that one should be always producing. And that should be the number one focus for any artist, is what are you producing? What is the quality of it before you share that with the world? Because once you share it with the world, most times there's no going back.
Very true. Good stuff, Raz.
I guess it's my turn to ask you a few questions.
Oh no! You got me! Lay it on me.
First off, what inspired you to do this podcast series?
You kind of touched on it a little bit. Originally, I wanted to reunite the guys from back in the day. Everybody on our scene, you know, involved in our scene. I just wanted to check in with everybody, see how they're doing, and see if they wanted to just get together and jam or put on a one-day show or something, you know. And it kind of branched out into something else in addition to that, because I reached out on Facebook asking for Missouri. No, I think I asked for area-specific artists, like Lake of the Ozarks area, and I didn't really hear much. And then I said Missouri, and like my Facebook was just blowing up with bands like, yeah, I'll be on the podcast, and I still haven't gotten to some of them, but that kind of opened my eyes to like, there's a need here. These bands and artists are looking for a voice and a platform to introduce themselves in a way. So those two things put together is kind of what's the driving force of this whole thing.
Well, it seems to be working out for you, because when I first learned of it, I believe my brother was the first one you had interviewed for it.
Right.
And it surprised me, because I thought, why didn't someone think of this years ago? Because you're correct. People in our position who were a part of the scene, it doesn't matter how far back, even before we were doing it, you know, there wasn't a platform. And by platform, I don't mean social media platform. There was no one leading the charge, reaching out to these people saying, hey, if you got a story to tell, we'd love to hear it, because you still contributed something to the musical world, whether other people appreciate that or not.
Yeah. I'm open to talking to, you know, older people, young people, people who play currently, people who don't play anymore, because like you said, you know, they contributed something and they have stories to tell, and I'd love to hear about how the Missouri music scene was in the 80s or the 70s, and there's such a melting pot of genres and styles in this area. You got, you know, stuff like you do, and there's such a country and bluegrass, and I mean, you name it, like it's here in Missouri. So I'd love to talk to artists of any genre or age.
Well, and there's going to be plenty of those too. So I hope they learn of your series so that they can come out from the woodwork, so to speak. Be like, hey, we've got a story to tell too. Well, come on board.
I appreciate that. I agree, yeah.
This isn't a ship that's limited.
No, not at all. You know, it kind of started out that way with it's like I just want to get together and play a reunion show with my friends, and it's just evolved into something even bigger, and I'm really glad and grateful that it has, because it's been so much fun to talk to people and get to know new people and be exposed to new music and stuff.
And also get different perspectives on, you know, such as my case with ST's story. You know, I was kind of a missing piece and all that, because I was just a fill-in for them originally. I wasn't meant to be a permanent member. Now, I was willing to be a permanent member, but by the time the band broke up in 2007, you know, the breaking up had nothing to do with me, because again, I was just kind of stuck in the middle of what was going on, but I was willing to see it all the way. And I remember telling them the day, I can't remember if it was the day that it was decided that the band was going to disband, but when they were trying to hash things out, I remember telling them all that it doesn't matter who's doing what. If it's something bad, stop it, get over it, let's move on with this, because I said your band has potential. And I hope they may remember that I said this, but I told all of them that your band has more potential to make it than mine. And that was because that band was more popular. People enjoyed their stage show, and they were growing in the mid-Missouri area. And that wasn't, when I told them that, I wasn't taking anything away from what I had already done musically, because I knew full well what I was capable of as a musician, but I also knew what their band overall was capable of, if given the right opportunity and if they had stuck together. But, you know, it's hard for groups to stick together. You know, sometimes the famous ones only stick together because of this, because of contract. So it's a lot harder for local bands to stay together because there isn't this.
They don't have separate tour buses.
No. It's all about whether or not do they want to continue doing this. Do they have the drive to do it? And some people lose it. Some people don't play anymore, which is a shame. But, you know, there were times where I didn't play because I was focused on trying to get T-Ab out in a literary form. But now things have come full circle for me, as you said, to where I don't have to just separate myself so much like I used to, where, okay, it's only book-related stuff or music-related stuff. Now I've mastered my craft enough to where I can go into it whenever I want to. I'm not as limited as I used to be.
I wish I could do that.
And tell me this, what is the biggest gratification you get out of interviewing people when it comes to the music scene, knowing that you were a part of the music scene as well?
I think something I've witnessed frequently is it's like a period of reflection and introspection. Like I can tell that people just have this moment where they think back to how they were and the things they did or said. And
you're able to pull a sense of joy out of them.
Yeah, and the nostalgia kicks in, you know, but as minuscule as they may feel their impact was on everything at that time, like they look back on it fondly, like everybody does, and they still enjoy it, like the ones that are still active. But seeing those kind of feelings, like you were talking about the ethereal realm earlier, like being able to see that through people has been really cool. Like I haven't really seen that before.
I would imagine it's quite rewarding, considering, you know, some groups have bad blood between each other, and then all these years later you're able to talk to them on a different level,
Yeah.
a different wavelength, and it brings back a time when they were happy doing something like that, and it makes them
Yeah.
realize that, hey, that's still a part of me whether I still do it or not.
Yeah, you're literally like unlocking people's memories sometimes. A really good example of what you asked was, it wasn't recorded, but when I interviewed Darren Blank, afterwards I was jamming. I had my guitar out and I was playing some old ST stuff. Well, if those of you who haven't listened to his podcast, please do so. He hasn't played drums in over 10 years. And so I started playing an ST song, and the smile on his face was so rewarding to see. And then he literally started air drumming as I was playing it. And it just blew me away, because, this guy, he hasn't drummed in so long. And it was just a big combination of everything I described, like the unlocking of the memories and, and that feeling of joy and looking back at it fondly. Like, it was so cool to see that.
Yeah, because a lot of us that have experienced trauma through situations such as band breakups, we lock that away mentally, and we don't technically forget it, but we forget the overall picture of it. So that relates back to what you were just saying, is when you're approaching these people, such as myself, to dive back into our past, it reawakens some of that passion they had when they were doing it. And by the way, if next time you talk to Darren, you tell him I have a 10-piece drum set that he's welcome to play on if us guys for ST could ever get back together for even just one gig.
That's good news.
Assuming he doesn't have a drum set anymore.
No, man. That makes me happy. That's cool. It's a rewarding thing, that's for sure.
Well, and I was honored when you had reached out to me to even do this, because I didn't see your message at first, and I hadn't done an interview in at least 3 years, and I thought, I hadn't seen a video one from you yet, and I thought, you know what, let's do a video one so that people can see me, see my face, and not feel so overwhelmed by whatever it is that they think I am as an artist these days, because I have enemies out there. I have naysayers. To this day, I still have them. But the funny thing is they don't get to me. The reason why is because they spend more time trying to hate on people like me versus trying to do anything creative themselves.
Right.
And I'm kind of what they call an energy absorber. So, for instance, it's part of my methodology for being the artist that I am. If anything is kind of brought to me in a way that feels challenging, that's why I warn people, like, if you don't want to see me do my best, don't challenge me creatively. You want to see me do my best, you challenge me. And that comes in different forms, even from the naysayers. The more, it's kind of a catch-22 to some people, but sometimes getting negative attention can be a good thing, because it makes you realize where you stand and that you must be doing something right if you're already getting naysayers, because you're not going to please everyone with one's work.
Right. Yeah, you're invoking a reaction or an emotion out of people.
And I've been able to invoke, both positive and negative. The funny thing is, when it's negative, it has nothing to do with the work itself. It's because they don't like me, which is fine. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but, my work is a direct reflection of who I am as a person. So the more anyone can get to know my work, the more they'll know and understand me, especially when it comes to T-Ub as a novel series. I poured my heart and soul into that, and, the main character, Victor Zayas, he's based off me. So you want to get a better idea of who I am as a person, whether good or bad, read it. I'm not saying you read it particularly, but just, in general, because, I'm not here to blow smoke up anyone's ass or anything about, well, I'm this and that, I can do this and that. Like, yes, I can do those things, but I'm just another guy trying to do what I do best. And only I can do what I do, just like everyone else are the only ones that can do what they do, because we all have a certain level of individuality. But what separates me from your average artist is I've learned how to master that individuality, to where like, okay, well, this is me. I have a stamp of approval on everything that I do, and everyone should to their own extent, and everyone already does. It just depends on what level do they want that kind of stamp of quality with everything that they do produce.
I agree. It's well said. All right, Raz. You said that you have 9 songs online, is that right?
There are 9 songs currently online.
So tell me about Rattle the Cage.
Rattle the Cage was a song that was written and mostly recorded back in 2013. On Super Bowl Sunday of 2013, I was approached through Facebook from a female singer named Danielle Bloom, who resides in Nashville. I think we'd had each other on our MySpace pages at one point, but I had never met her personally. She approached me about helping her to write a party song. She wanted an anthem of sorts. Why she approached me, I don't know, because I don't recall that I even had my music on MySpace at the time, but she had somehow heard of me, I guess when I had the band back then. And I just kind of told her that, well, I can help you write a song. I can't do a party song. That's not my forte, because mine is more what would be considered well thought out type of writing. And I was re-listening to the Last Action Hero soundtrack, which for those who don't know was one of the absolute best soundtracks ever made as far as the bands that are on there. And I just laid down to sleep and came up with this riff in my head. I immediately got up, started playing it on guitar, and then the next day, I kind of came up with that and the verse rhythm. And I tried to describe to her that, okay, I'm going to use, influential examples. AC/DC's Big Gun and Megadeth's Angry Again, both songs which are on that soundtrack and kind of similar in tempo and attitude. And when I presented her what I was doing, she liked it and seemed to understand the energy, why I was going for that. And I said, I can't write you a party song, but I'll write you an anthem. And I titled it Rattle the Cage, which was inspired by a scene from Batman Begins.
Oh,
there's a scene where Rachel confronts Bruce in the suit for the first time, and he mentions when it comes to Carmine Falcone that you rattled his cage, and so I thought that's a cool term. I'd heard it before as a kid, but I hadn't heard it again as an adult until that film, so I decided to call it Rattle the Cage. Well, it came down to the point where she didn't use it because she thought it was too heavy for her.
Oh.
Because her main style was kind of Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones, and she's one of the best singers I've ever met. I mean, she can just belt it out. She's a very talented woman. I finally got to meet her in person later that year in 2013, and even though she respectfully passed on the song, we keep in contact every once in a while, but essentially that's how that song came to be. And then I just decided to use it under my own banner because I thought, well, if no one else is going to use it, I originally wrote it for her beginning to end, so I just released it myself.
Legends of the Fall.
Legends of the Fall was a song that came about from the creative process in early 2010. Obviously, the name was inspired by the name of the film, the Brad Pitt film, even though the subject matter is completely different. In my song, or the subject matter for the song in general, it's about those of us that survive a fall of society type event, and that those who do survive, we become legends. And so, throughout the song, it has that fast intensity of, all of this going on. Society's crumbling before us, but there are those of us that are standing up against this corruption that caused such a thing, and therefore we are the legends of the societal fall.
Okay. That's pretty cool.
Forever,
In the Demon's Hand?
In the Demon's Hand was a song I started back in 2008. That was a difficult song to write. So sometimes when I would write a song, it could take me a couple of months to finish, depending on the complexity of it. In the Demon's Hand didn't get finished until summer of 2011. And that song kind of speaks for itself, but it's not about drug issues with other people or anything like that. It's essentially about the battle that we have internally. We all have our own demons, and sometimes we allow ourselves to become victim by being in the demon's hand.
Night Angel?
Night Angel was a song after a difficult separating from someone that I used to really care about, and that was a song that was written very quickly within a matter of 10 hours. And essentially the song covers the topic of, the person that you love, you would do anything for them and have this kind of knighthood about it. You're going to protect them, be their guardian, and what would you do or say if they were going to pass over to the next world?
Lords of Chaos.
Lords of Chaos was another song that came about in 2010. That one kind of covers, I don't lyrically get specific about things such as the Illuminati, but it's essentially about how the secret societies have been running things behind the scenes, and how, thanks to them, we're always stuck, salute the Lords of Chaos for always causing such chaos.
The Edge of Beyond.
The Edge of Beyond as a musical track was actually the first thing I ever wrote back in 2003. Now, back then, the lyrics weren't what you hear now. I had tried to make that into a song where I just normally sing to, but because it was meant to be the title track for T.I.O.B. as a franchise, I wrote lyrics into it that's kind of like a chant, because in the book series it's known as the slave theme. It's known as the theme that the humans that have become enslaved know amongst themselves in folklore. It's what they use to try to inspire themselves to rise above the shackles of their slavery. And so there's an intro part to that that's kind of slower, and that has the chanting part. The second part is more of the metal section that would act as like an end credits theme, if you were to imagine T.I.O.B. on, say, an IMAX screen.
Shadowheart.
Shadowheart was a song that came about in 2005, in similar fashion to how Night Angel came about. Now that one I wrote in 6 hours, surprisingly, and it was the first song I ever wrote that had a mainstream feel to it. Because at the time I was still writing 6.5, 8.5 minute long songs. So when I was writing that one, I just poured whatever emotions I had into it. And I was already working on that, intro riff, and the intro riff just kind of did everything else for me. It just, when you listen to it, it's just a kind of a natural progression. And when I wrote it, originally I didn't want to use it for my band. I thought, oh, well, this is going to be too soft for what I'm trying to do. I was trying to do more of the real thrashy stuff at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time I got it recorded, I thought, well, I found it catchy, others found it catchy, so it was always played live. Shadowheart is essentially about what those of us that feel being tortured souls go through, and how we're kind of shunned from society because we're seen as the outcast. And there's times where we feel like, God, disgrace to us, and we feel like there's nothing out there for us. And it's supposed to speak to those that have been to the darkest place of their hearts at some point in life. But it's not meant to be a negative song. It's just meant to be a reflection that, hey, I understand how you feel too.
The Next Dimension.
That was a song that actually took me 3 hours to write. That was back in 2005. I had just learned the Megadeth song Prince of Darkness, which is in D tuning. And I wasn't used to D tuning because most of Megadeth's catalog back then was in E standard,
Mm-hmm.
which is what I mostly play in anyway. And I was just, playing around on the guitar and trying to do something fast, and I came up with this riff. It was one of the few instances where I was just focused on the instrumentality before what I was singing about. Because most times when I write a song, my process is I have to have a title. I may have a riff first before I can progress with any lyrics or anything. I have to know what I'm singing about.
Right.
But for this song, I wrote the instrumentation and then decided to call it The Next Dimension, which is a play on something that used to be a part of Dragon Ball Z. When Cartoon Network first started airing that in the late 90s, there was what was known as the Ocean Dub. A company out of Canada did the original English voice casting for it, and there was a terminology that they used to refer to as dying or being defeated in battle or passing over to the next world. They would call it being sent to another dimension or the next dimension. And so I took that and decided to kind of play around with my own verbiage with it, and relate it to Tiab as a literary work, but as well as real life where, when you're in the heat of battle, whether it be honor or dishonorable, there may be a time where, salute you, you're being sent to another dimension or the next dimension. Final Bout, another one from 2005. That one was written to be, it was my take on, for instance, I assume you've seen the film Starship Troopers.
No.
Well, shame.
I know.
I'll have to let you borrow it, but, well, not even just that film. It was my take on what soldiers go through when they go to battle, not knowing if they're going to survive. But at the same time, there's an overall epic scale to it about, like the final battle, whether it be that spiritual battle that we all call Armageddon, and those of us that are sent in to fight it, and realizing that, hey, this isn't all it's cracked up to be. This isn't what we signed up for, because a lot of them will sign up to join such service, not realizing what the reason behind these battles are for. And so the final bout being that, this is it. We're going into a situation that we're unfamiliar with. We're probably going to lose our lives in it, but it's something that we have to do regardless of the corruption behind the military-industrial complex that put us in that position.
You got a new song coming out in December, is that right?
Yes, that is strictly an instrumental that was written in December of 2012, so this December will be its 10th anniversary, and it's called Monstrosity. Originally, it was written as a gift to someone that I used to be somewhat of a guardian for, and never got to give it to her as a birthday present. That's what it was written for, and I just sat on it for years, and then I came up with a story behind it 4 years ago, which is one that I plan to publish eventually through R.A.W Productions, and it involves a dystopian world where most music, if not all, has been banned. But in order for, certain corporate and military entities to feel entertainment, they start bringing in these high-end composers to, do these concerts for them. And the concept for the story is, music has been banned for so long that in this society, these artists that can play they're not familiar with music that came before, like the way that we are. So I had envisioned a film where it would play like some famous select pieces of music that we as American society know, and this person would be able to tap into the ethereal realm and bring this out, and it was starting to wake up people from the corruption that was going on from their dystopian society. And so that's, it's about a maestro, so to speak, that's able to pull into that and bring this beautiful music back to the world that, makes people feel that emotion once again, but his life's being threatened because of it, because he has started a movement.
Wow.
So it's become a monstrous creation in what he did, because it's disrupting the system of things, but it's waking people up emotionally and spiritually, because we're dealing with a society that completely did not grow up listening to such beautiful music, and now they're hearing it for the first time, so they start revolting against the system because of what this maestro was doing. And that's more of like a film type concept behind the story for it, but that's why I called it Maestrosity.
I would hope that anybody who hasn't heard any of these songs yet, hopefully after they hear this, they will go listen to them with that, with all those things in mind.
Yeah, anyone that listens to my music, I don't do what a lot of bands do. For instance, even, Megadeth. They may be my favorite band, but they're very geopolitical, as a lot of my music is too. But I don't and I will not sing about specifics in our society.
Mm-hmm.
Such as, you won't hear me mention certain politicians, certain government factions. You won't even technically hear me say anything regarding the name America or American, because when I started off as a musician, I thought, I want to write music that comes off more universal, something that would be more timeless. And if you're talking about specific regimes or world politics, that limits it, and it gives it an expiration date.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
I mean, nothing against those out there that have concept songs or albums that cover certain historical topics, but I prefer to have more of a general subject matter. I may talk about a specific subject, but it's more generalized, so that it could always relate to what's going on in the world.
Yeah, and it's more open to the listener's interpretation.
Yes. They're not listening to it thinking that, oh, well, this song is singing about something that happened 50 years ago.
Yeah.
What does that mean to us now?
Uh-huh.
So I choose to write my lyrics to, be more relatable in that sense, where, Lords of Chaos is a good example, because, it sings about those of us that have suffered at the hands of these secret societies that work behind the scenes to make our lives miserable. But I don't get into specifics with name dropping, because that's a subject that's going to be with us to the end of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, to me, it doesn't do any good to get too specific. I have more of a generalized way of approaching the lyrical form of such songs.
Do you have a song or a clip that you want to introduce?
It's got to be Final Bout.
Well, Raz, it's been great talking to you, great catching up with you.
Yeah.
I'll never catch up to you, but it's been great catching up with you, and I hope we can keep in touch.
We most definitely will. It's been an honor to do this. I've never done an interview of this style, but I'm glad that we got to do it for the first time with your podcast series, because that means a lot to me, and I'm sure it means a lot to other people that you've already interviewed, that you're going out of your way. You're providing a service for those of us that, whether we play music still or not, you're helping us to be remembered. I mean, we're kind of the ones that are considered the fallen ones of the music scene.
Absolutely.
And we're still getting to, have that voice because of people like you. So,
I appreciate it. I appreciate you, and I appreciate your time.
I appreciate your time as well, and I look forward to doing this again in the near future, because I'm sure we're going to have a lot more to talk about.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And that's a handshake, by the way.
Surrey musicians then and now.